What is the path to power with God? How can we, as believers, live a life that amounts to more than we were capable of? I want you to think about that. How can you live a life as a Christian that when it's all said and done, your life amounts to more than you were capable of? To be used of God for others. The path to power. Notice, though the Apostle Paul was with the Corinthians, look at verse 3, it says, in weakness, in fear, and in much trembling, his speech and his preaching was in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. Whose power? Paul's? Look at verse 5 again. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 5. He said that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, the wisdom of Paul, but rather in the power of God. Turn to Romans chapter 7. Romans chapter 7. Now, the first step on the path to power has to do with this: perception. Perception. In other words, realizing your own insufficiency. If we could put that first principle up on the screen. The first principle pertaining to perception is this: there is a direct correlation between perception and power. Meaning, your perception of self without God will inevitably determine your power with God. I'll say that again. Your perception of self without God, how you perceive yourself outside of God, outside of Christ, will inevitably determine your power with God. You're there in Romans chapter 7. Look at verse 18. Again, the Apostle Paul speaking. This is the great Apostle Paul. Notice what he says. For I know that in me, he specifies, that is, in my flesh, watch this, dwelleth some good things. Is that what he said? Some redeeming qualities. No. He said, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good, I find not. What is Paul saying? Paul is saying that the good in me is God in me. Look at verse 24 of the same chapter. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? Paul expresses a similar sentiment in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5. He says, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, Paul writes, this is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptation, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, watch this, of whom I am chief. One of the greatest Christians considered himself the chiefest of sinners. Now, I would argue that Paul's perception of self was one of the driving factors behind the power and success of his ministry, undoubtedly. Think about all that Christ accomplished through the Apostle Paul. Acts chapter 19, verse 26 says of Paul's ministry, moreover, ye see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul, one man, one individual, hath persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands. Paul's perception of self. This wretched man, this chief of sinners, persuaded and turned away much people. Why? Partly because of his perception. Paul realized his own insufficiency.